Joining me now is Jonathan Emmert, who is a board member of the Certified Board of Nutritional Specialists. He is a lawyer who specializes in food and drug law. He also served as the vice president of Cato Institute, and he currently is a justice columnist for USA Today magazine. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you.
Hey, so first, we want to talk about the FDA and some recent acts that have been passed or pending. And, the spin that the politicians put on it is, thank God for the FDA, because without the FDA, we'd all be dying from poison in our foods, because greedy businesses who are just trying to make a buck would cut corners and poison all their customers. Although, if you're trying to get repeat business, I don't think killing your customers is really in your own self-interest. But anyway, they take credit for the fact that food is safe, and I guess they don't give any of it to the free market. But what is going on now with the FDA? What about, they have a bill coming, a new Food Labeling Act?
Yes. Senator Durbin, who is no friend of a free market, in fact, he's the principal catalyst in the Senate for expanding the federal government right and left. He's the biggest proponent of increasing the legislative, executive, and judicial powers of the independent regulatory commissions. One of his favorites to increase power over industry is the Food and Drug Administration. This bill, which is called the Dietary Supplement Labeling Act of 2011, Senate Bill 1310, would require every supplement company in the United States to register with the FDA, inform the FDA of every ingredient in their products, and have the Secretary of HHS, meaning the FDA commissioner actually, to review all the ingredients and determine whether any would pose a potential for health risk, and then to take action against those ingredients.
Well, are people getting sick or dying based on bad vitamins?
No, it's the latest method under the guise of food safety. The Congress and the FDA have found that consumers will accept an enormous amount of regulation that they otherwise would not accept. Direct regulation to eliminate dietary supplement companies or cause dietary supplements to be recategorized as either drugs or food additives, making them virtually impossible to sell. Those attempts over the years have failed miserably as people perceive the action of government to be one designed to take away from them their freedom of choice. However, under the guise of food safety and under the guise of protecting people from the potential of terrorists contaminating the food supply, the government has been able to achieve the very same ends that they were interested in achieving before. In fact, we are now suffering from an epidemic of regulation in the food area. There is so much activity here and so much enforcement activity, so many perverse incentives for the government to act against perfectly decent, honest people selling good food, that we are in for a very dramatic change in the food marketplace, one that will reduce consumer choice, increase cost, and make people far less able to get organic kinds of foods in the market.
Yeah, well, that's what always happens in an industry that gets regulated, like the financial service industry. They're gonna regulate this industry. It's going to cost a fortune to comply with all the regulations, and all of that added costs now needs to be put onto the food. It's now like, it might even be more expensive than the fertilizer or the feed. I mean, the most expensive component of food production in America could be regulation. I mean, so now all our farms going to have to hire compliance officers, full-time compliance people, and to go through reams and reams of paperwork to make sure they're complying with the food laws?
That's right. The Food Safety Modernization Act, which was passed and is now being implemented by FDA, will require every food manufacturer, including small farms that engage in farm-to-market sales, to register with the FDA. This extensive compliance requirements, registering with the FDA, and undergo inspections. And there's a perverse incentive built into this law. If the FDA finds a violation of any of its regulations, and there are numerous food safety regulations, then it can perform and must perform a follow-up inspection and charge the party that's being inspected the cost of the inspection. FDA estimates that this will increase its revenue by $100 million in the first year of implementation, that is this year, And these small to medium-sized businesses, farm-based businesses, are really going to be pushed out of the market.
That's always...
They can't afford the cost.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening in the brokerage industry as more and more small firms are closing shop because they can't afford the compliance costs. It's the big agro farmers, the guys that have the economies of scale, and the guys that probably make big donations to the government that then goes after their smaller competitors who don't have the economies of scale, and so they buy them out on the cheap, or they remove a competitor, and now it's a less competitive market. They can make more money.
Well, the large processed food manufacturers have for years lamented the interest of consumers in organic products, and Whole Foods and various other organic suppliers have become very popular with consumers, and small local farms have turned to economic advantage the business of producing organic foods. Well, those farms now will have to be registered. Their people will be inspected. The costs of compliance will cause many of them to go out of business, and the processed food manufacturers will get their way. The competition that they had hoped would be stemmed by government regulation will be, because their lobbying efforts.
Yeah. Meanwhile, when we're protected by paid bureaucrats, they don't really have an interest. They can easily be bribed, and people can cut corners. But these local farmers, I mean, nobody has more of an incentive to have healthy products than these local farmers, because their reputation would be shot. I mean, if there was something got out that there was some problem with their food, it was contaminated for some reason, they would go out of business. Nobody would buy it. I mean, their whole reputation is based on people believing that these products are healthy, and they know they live and die by that reputation.
Well, the organic, the purchasers, the food buyers that work for these institutions like Whole Foods are very, very careful and have extremely exacting standards for quality of product. They don't want to put some product on their shelves that's riddled with E. coli and have an utter disaster in the marketplace. That's the farthest thing from their minds that they want to see. So they routinely engage in extremely copious review of the quality of products to make sure that the best products are there. Mm-hmm. And they have no shortage of opportunities in the present market. That's going to change.
Yeah, I'd much rather have Whole Food with its reputation on the line police its own suppliers than turn the function over to the government that doesn't really give a damn. And then thing is, Whole Foods is going to have, it's going to have its own compliance that makes sense financially, economically. They're going to do it in an efficient way. The government is going to have these farmers wasting their time doing all kinds of stuff that all it does is run up the cost and does nothing to get the food safe.
Absolutely. There's no question about the consequence of this. The food market is one of the safest markets that exist, and the organic food market is extraordinarily safe. These regulations will have no effect on increasing safety. Rather, they will just diminish the availability of products and diminish the consumer choice that is available.
I would also think that the typical consumer who is buying organic products, and I only have organic products here, they're more expensive already. And I think the people who are buying these products in general are more sophisticated and more health conscious, and so are capable of making these decisions without the nanny state trying to intervene on their behalf.
Well, the nanny state is driven by political motivations: the choice of who to prosecute, the choice of who to make a pariah in the marketplace and to condemn. These are all choices made by politicians, the political appointees of the agencies. They're not made based on some scientific basis. It's predicated upon the predilections of the...
And it's fear, because if you oppose any of this stuff, you're for poison in the food. Hey, Jonathan, so I think was the FDA, it was formed, was it 1906 or 1930? When did the FDA get started?
Well, the FDA originally got started as a part of the Department of Commerce. It had a little lab that would test for instances of contamination. It really had a very limited role, and it really wasn't recognized as being an agency until the 1930s, when the Roosevelt administration created this massive institution. And then it gained additional powers over foods and over drugs, reached its pinnacle of power in the 1960s with the Kefauver amendments which enabled it to evaluate before a drug could be approved. It had to evaluate safety and efficacy. The process, though, from the very beginning, FDA has been a captive of the industry, and more so now than ever before.
Yeah, and I think when you mentioned that 1960, when the FDA required drug companies to prove efficacy, I mean, I think that is the single biggest factor behind how expensive drugs are today, because you have to prove efficacy. It makes no sense to me. Let the market judge whether a drug is effective or not. I mean, if they want to say, okay, we're going to make sure it doesn't hurt you, well, that's one thing. But to say that the government has to say that it works, let doctors and patients decide if it works. How many people in America die because drugs that might have saved them are kept off the market? How many people enroll in these random double-blind experiments, and there's a life-saving drug, and they don't get it because they get a placebo and they die, so they can get the FDA to approve the drug?
Well, it's a big myth that FDA actually evaluates safety or efficacy. To tell you the truth, the agency does none of its own testing to determine whether a drug is safe or efficacious. It relies entirely on the drug applicant's application. It charges some $295,000 for the privilege of receiving an application. You have to pay that drug user fee in order to file an application. And then the medical reviewers at FDA only review the paperwork. They do none of the testing. They do none of the independent evaluation.
Right, but they require the companies to spend enormous amounts of money to compile the data that they then examine.
Right. It's about, on average, $600 million for a single drug to reach the point where it can be approved by FDA. This is a game only played by the wealthiest state-sponsored monopolies in the world. As a consequence, innovation, true innovation, in therapies is lagging way behind.
I know this is money.
Professor at university who discovers a therapeutic agent is unlikely to ever see his discovery become a patented drug and to be approved by the FDA, because only if he can get a drug company sponsor to submit the application will he have any hope of getting it through. FDA routinely approves drugs that are unsafe. It actually is heavily corrupt in this way. For example, the antibiotic drug Ketec, which was labeled a super antibiotic against virulent strains of bacteria, that drug was the product of a clinical trial that was forged. And among the other clinical trials that were submitted, the primary trial was completely fabricated. FDA's medical reviewers discovered the fabrication. The Justice Department began prosecution of the parties involved. And at the FDA, the medical reviewers urged the commissioner to deny the application. But to show you just how powerful the drug industry is over the FDA commissioner overruled the medical reviewers and approved the drug. It's in the market today with the very same claims that arose out of the fraudulent clinical trial.
And I also think, too,
the kind of abuse that takes place at this wretched agency.
Well, I think what also happens is if somebody comes up with a good product and that competes with some of the ones that really have captured it, that they will put pressure on the FDA to deny an application, maybe even if it's a better product, because it competes with something that's already out there, and they don't want that.
Absolutely. And this process, for people don't recognize this, but there was an entire FBI sting operation about 20 years ago at FDA where the generic drug section was shown to be rife with corruption, with drug companies paying medical reviewers to put their drug applications on top because the first approved generic drug would set the standard under the rules for the agent, for the market.
Yeah.
So there was all this graft and corruption going on there. But it still continues to this day within the agency.
Yeah.
Another example, very quick one, Avandia, type 2 diabetes drug, was shown in independent studies published in the peer-reviewed literature to create heart toxicity. And despite the fact that it creates heart toxicity and the publicity about it reduced the market share of the company that made it, the FDA commissioner, rather than take it off the market, kept it on the market and restricted use to precisely those at highest risk, the ones who are continuing, the ones who had already been prescribed the drug. And this was all designed to protect the market share of the company so that it wouldn't suffer a significant financial loss, all on the backs of the American people who are taking this drug and suffering the heart toxicity.
Yeah, has anybody, there's studies that go back, I'm going back to food again, prior to 1930, prior to the Depression, when we really, expanded the role of the FDA. What was the quality of the nation's food supply? I mean, were people dropping dead left and right based on contaminated food, or were the farms and the supermarkets doing a pretty good job of supplying a healthy food to Americans?
Well, they were. I mean, there have been many advances in food safety by the industry over the years. Refrigeration techniques and pasteurization and other techniques have helped to some degree in reducing contamination. But, raw milk, if properly refrigerated, is just as safe as pasteurized milk. The government would have you believe the contrary, that only pasteurized milk is safe, and this is another lobbying success by the major
raw milk
food
is
industry.
banned. That's when Ron Paul recently was talking about that, as far as lifting the ban on raw milk. I mean, so it is illegal for a market to sell raw milk, even if a customer
in
wants to
interstate
buy
commerce. That's why Dan Algier, I represent Grass-Fed on the Hill. Dan Algier, a Amish farmer in Kinzers, Pennsylvania, suffered the full weight of the federal government coming with the United States Marshals coming onto his dairy farm because he had the audacity to fall prey to a government sting operation in which they induced him to bring 23 units of his raw milk in a refrigerated truck across from Pennsylvania into Maryland to a government safe house where FDA agents were posing as husband and wife ordering his product. They then went on to test his product, and they could find no evidence in the 23 units they obtained of unsafe pathogens. The product was entirely safe. Nevertheless, they're prosecuting him in federal court in Pennsylvania for violating the FDA rule that prohibits interstate movement of unpasteurized milk.
Oh, well, it's a good use of our taxpayer dollars,
Right. Not only that, they're asking for the court to award them the cost of their year-long investigation and sting, which will run Dan out of business, and he'll have to sell all of his cows. This is the kind of abusive government. The yeoman farmer was instrumental in the American Revolution. The yeoman farmer is the backbone of patriotic America. And this is just filled with extreme irony. Here the government, on the basis of food safety, is going after a safe product, alleging it to be unsafe, and is destroying one of the most, perfectly virtuous, wonderful people in this country, this Dan Algier, just because it has the power to do it, and because it's government run amok, and if anybody is opposed, anybody wants to ratchet down the Food and Drug Administration, you just say, "Whoa, you want the consumers to die from poisonous food and bad drugs?" Anyway, look, we're running out of time. I wanted to talk about some of this evidence that came out about that all the FDA requiring companies to put all the calorie counts on their food, and how that has been proven now to have been a complete waste of time and money. But anyway, we're out of time. But Jonathan, you've been a great guest. Maybe we'll have you on again. Anyway.